Welcome back to The Explainer. We've got a fantastic one lined up for you today. We're stepping into the shoes of the ultimate medical detective to tackle some incredibly high-stakes scenarios, specifically diagnosing spinal cord lesions and CNS emergencies. You know, in urology, time is literally tissue. It's kind of like trying to defuse a bomb, but the wiring diagram, well, it's hidden entirely inside the patient's physical symptoms. Figuring out those clues before you ever even glance at a scan is absolutely crucial. Here's our roadmap for this investigation. We'll start with the neurological localization puzzle, then hit traumatic spinal cord lesions and acute spinal cord compression. After that, we'll decode the classic Brown-Séquard Syndrome, and finally, wrap things up with advances in CNS imaging. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the neurological localization puzzle. The absolute golden rule here is that we have to deduce exactly where a lesion is located using just the history and exam, way before the patient ever rolls into radiology. Okay, let's dive into how we actually do this. We use a classic diagnostic approach. You might remember the DAPSIC mnemonic, and it basically forces us to answer 3 sequential questions. First off, what exactly is the neurologic deficit? Second, based on that deficit, where is the lesion hiding in the nervous system? And third, what's the likely cause? You literally cannot figure out the what without first knowing the where. The step-by-step logic, that's our primary detective toolkit. And as you can see, specific physical clues map instantly to exact anatomical sites. For example, if a patient has contralateral weakness and expressive aphasia, boom, we immediately suspect the frontal lobe. Cross signs, like a cranial nerve palsy on one side paired with limb deficits on the other, point us straight to the brainstem. But let's look at the spinal cord. This is key. If you see a distinct sensory level, bilateral weakness, and sphincter dysfunction altogether, we know for sure the cord is involved and we've got to act incredibly fast. Which brings us right to Section 2, traumatic spinal cord lesions. Because while some neurodiseases take decades to brew, acute trauma puts the spinal cord at extreme, immediate risk. 87%. Just let that sink in for a second. It's a staggering statistic from the medical literature. Motor vehicle accidents, violent crimes, and falls account for nearly 9 out of 10 spinal cord injuries. We aren't talking about simple lower back strains here. Trauma to the cervical spine puts this incredibly delicate cord at intense risk for compression, and the consequences of that can be absolutely devastating and permanent for the patient. Because of that sky-high risk, clinical guidelines lay down this absolute non-negotiable rule. Emergency immobilization of the neck prior to complete assessment is mandatory to minimize further spinal cord injury from movement of unstable cervical spine segments. Basically, any patient with post-traumatic midline cervical spine tenderness absolutely needs a hard collar and backboard before our detective work can safely continue. You stabilize first to protect the cord. Period. Okay, moving right along to Section 3, acute spinal cord compression. This is where things get really intense, as we are talking about a true drop-everything neurosurgical emergency. So I want you to think about this for a second. What are the actual clinical red flags of acute compression? If you're standing right there evaluating a patient, what are the specific warning signs screaming at you that immediate intervention is needed to save their neurological function? Well, the literature highlights a very specific constellation of signs. We're looking for bilateral pain, we're looking for lower motor neuron, or LMN, signs, exactly at the level of compression. We also need to watch for upper motor neuron, or UMN, signs, and sensory loss below the lesion. And finally, sphincter disturbance, so things like hesitancy, frequency, or painless urinary retention. Spotting these quickly is a total game changer. It can literally prevent irreversible damage, like permanent paralysis or incontinence, by getting them decompressive treatments immediately. Now, what's really fascinating about this, and kind of brilliant from an anatomical standpoint, is how a single localized lesion gives you completely different clinical signs depending on where you test the body. Right at the exact level where the cord or nerve root is getting crushed, you're going to see those lower motor neuron signs. Think flaccid weakness, atrophy, no reflexes. But if you test below that level, the pathways coming down from the brain are completely cut off, so you get upper motor neuron signs, meaning spastic leg weakness, hyperactive reflexes, and upgoing plantars. It's like a perfect anatomical dividing line that tells you exactly where the damage is hiding. And that deep dive into localization leads us perfectly into Section 4, decoding Brown-Séquard Syndrome. This is easily one of the most uniquely fascinating conditions in all of neurology, and it truly rewards a careful physical exam. So imagine the spinal cord being sliced perfectly down the middle. This hemisection, meaning exactly one half of the cord, left or right, is damaged or severed, creates this highly specific split presentation. The sources point out that whether it's from a stab wound, a nasty tumor, or MS, severing just one half of the cord completely rewires how the patient presents physically. And this brilliantly illustrates the crazy wiring of our nervous system. On the ipsilateral side, so the exact same side as the lesion, the patient loses motor power because the descending corticospinal tract is severed. They also lose proprioception and vibration sense since the dorsal columns are damaged. But on the contralateral side, the opposite side of the body, below the lesion, they actually lose pain and temperature sensation. Why? Because the spinothalamic tract, which handles those signals, crosses over to the opposite side the second it enters the spinal cord. So a lesion on the right side of the cord actually blocks pain signals coming from the left side of the body. It's just a spectacular demonstration of clinical neuroanatomy in action. All right, once we've used our clinical exam to nail down the location, we actually need to see it. That brings us to our final part, Section 5, Advances in CNS Imaging. This is where modern tech steps in to visualize the invisible damage we've just deduced. One of the most powerful tools in our arsenal for CNS emergencies is CT perfusion. It's a brilliant technique that maps out cerebral blood flow by taking continuous images right after an IV bolus of contrast medium. Now, while we usually talk about this with strokes, being able to understand blood flow and identify struggling ischemic tissue without needing some invasive catheter angiography is a massive advantage when you're in the middle of an acute crisis. And honestly, your standard CT scan is still the absolute frontline choice for ill or traumatized patients. It is incredibly fast and pretty much accessible everywhere. It beats MRI hands down for detecting acute hemorrhage, and it highlights bony fractures beautifully. It also quickly flags mass effect and herniation. When a trauma patient rolls through those emergency doors and literally every single second counts, a CT scan is the absolute best way to rapidly rule out life-threatening bleeding or unstable cervical spine fractures. But when we're looking at the soft tissue of the spinal cord itself, MRI is king. Let's demystify these scans really quickly by looking at the two main sequences. Basically, think of T1 for the anatomy and T2 for the disease. On a T1-weighted image, fat gives off a bright, high signal, while water is dark. That's fantastic for seeing normal anatomical structures. On the flip side, a T2-weighted MRI is amazing for spotting disease. On T2, water and fluid light up bright, and since pathology like spinal cord edema, inflammation, or an abscess is packed with water, it lights up brilliantly in bright white against the darker tissue. It makes it instantly recognizable for the radiologist. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this. When you suspect acute cord compression or a severe CNS lesion, do not delay imaging for any reason. The speed of your imaging needs to match the rate of the patient's clinical decline. The medical texts are super explicit about this. Spinal x-rays are completely unreliable for cord compression. Don't even bother. Skip the x-ray and go straight for the MRI, because MRI remains the definitive diagnostic modality to see exactly what's going on with that soft tissue. So we've tracked this whole diagnostic journey today, from the meticulous physical exam all the way to those advanced T2-weighted MRIs, and it leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to chew on. As our imaging tech gets exponentially faster and more precise, are we going to see a day when AI algorithms can map these complex spinal lesions and predict functional outcomes even faster than a seasoned neurologist's clinical exam? It is an incredible frontier to watch, that's for sure. Thanks so much for joining me to decode these medical mysteries today, and keep learning.